Hey, true crime fanatics, this is Claire.
And I'm Andy.
You're tuned in to the Homicide Hobbies podcast, which is a podcast for people who love to hear about the horrendous crimes that people commit. Enjoy. Do I need a pen and paper?
No. I feel like that was revenge and uncalled for. I said, no, lady. You can put that shit away and stop clicking the pen.
Go ahead.
Feeling feisty today, I see. So our when is going to be December 18th, 1994. Our where is going to be South Africa. So Alison was born September 22nd, 1967 in Port Elizabeth, South Africa. Alison spent most of her childhood living with her mother, Claire, and brother Neil after her parents divorced when she was just 10 years old. She lived a fairly normal life. She studied secretarial work, and after finishing her schooling, she traveled abroad for about 4 years before returning home to Port Elizabeth. She ended up getting a job as an insurance broker, and on Saturday, December 17th, 1994, Alison and some of her friends picked up some pizza after a fun day at the beach. They all went back to Alison's apartment to hang out. Eventually, after everyone decided to call it a night, Alison offered to drive one of her friends home since she had done her laundry at that friend's home and needed to pick it up anyway. Close to 1 a.m. on Sunday, December 18th, 1994, 27-year-old Alison drove back to her apartment after dropping her friend off. Her typical parking spot had been taken, so she had to park further away. As soon as the young woman parked her car, she reached towards her passenger seat to grab her bag of clean laundry to take inside. Suddenly, she felt a gust of warm air as a man held a knife to her throat as he opened her driver's door. He forced his way into her driver's seat, shoving her to the passenger seat. In mere seconds of flight or fight, unfortunately for Alison, she froze. As this man sped off with Alison now a hostage in her own vehicle, she quickly realized she was at the mercy of this stranger. He told her his name was Clinton, and he did not want to hurt her.
Why? What? Who does that?
I don't know.
Shove her over. My name's Clinton. Don't move.
But he said, I just want to use your car for about an hour. He asked Alison her name. She didn't want him to know her true name, so she told him her name was Susan. Clinton also tried some small talk, asking if she had a boyfriend.
This is the weirdest shit. What time of night is this?
It's a little after 1 a.m.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you just roll out your side passenger door?
She wanted to believe the best in humanity, I guess.
It's 1 a.m. He put a knife to your throat. What's to believe?
He said he wasn't going to hurt her. He was just basically carjacking her, and after an hour, he was going to let her go.
Then what's the knife for?
To steal the car. And she asked Clinton, though, if she could he just let her out, take the car?
Why ask permission? Open the door handle. Roll.
He was like, no, you're going to stay with me. Now, Clinton drove Alison and her car to go pick up his friend. Alison knew it wasn't going to be good. Clinton's buddy seemed to be a very angry, hostile man.
Because it's 1 a.m.
And she felt terrified at the way the man, the friend, was looking at her every time she would catch a glimpse of his eyes in the mirror. Because she's in the passenger seat and the friend's in the back behind her. The men drive Alison to a deserted area on the outskirts of town. The place was filthy with ash from old barbecue fires, broken bottles, discarded beer cans, and various pieces of trash. Clinton asked Alison, "Are you going to fight?" She was confused. They told her they were going to have sex with her and asked if she was going to fight them. Feeling like it was her only way to survive this horrible night, she said no, she wouldn't fight. They ordered her to strip naked, and she complied. Clinton shoved her face in his lap and ordered her to give him oral sex. He was violent and kept shoving her head all the way down, which kept making her gag. He then told Alison if she bit his penis, he would kill her as he pressed the knife into the back of her neck. He pulled her head away from his junk and got between her legs and performed oral sex on Alison, asking, "Does your boyfriend do this to you? Do you like it?" Then, this foul feller says, "You have the nicest tasting fanny."
Ew.
I'm laughing at your ew, by the way. Then he worked his way up her naked body and then bit her breast, leaving a mark. Clinton then smiled at her as he stuck his nasty tongue in her mouth. He then began raping her. She didn't want to touch him, so she pushed her hands against the ceiling of the car as he assaulted her. While he was raping her, she could see that his friend was standing there watching. When Clinton finished, he sat back in the driver's seat and he offered her body to his buddy, asking, "Do you want to have sex with this lovely lady?" His buddy replied, "No, I want to fuck the bitch." "Don't speak to her like that. She's a lady," Clinton said. Clinton's friend walked around to the passenger door and opened it. He kissed Alison. Although he was only semi-erect, he tried to shove his penis inside her. He attempted to aggressively rape Alison, but I guess because she was calm and complied, he pulled his dying pecker out of her, complaining, "I can't do this." And he slammed the door shut and sat on the car's trunk pouting. Yeah. He sat there with his arms crossed, just huffing and puffing because he couldn't do it.
Maybe he had whiskey dick.
Maybe. He pulled a hunting knife with a blade of about 8 inches from one of his pockets. The knife terrified Alison, and she felt even more vulnerable because she was still naked. She asked if she could redress. They told her no, but she redressed anyway while the men chatted at the trunk of the car. Clinton's friend became restless and called out to his buddy and said, "Hey, France." Alison made a mental note that Clinton's actual name was France. The two pals began discussing what they were going to do with Alison. Option 1, leave her naked and just take her car. If I were her, that would be the one I would choose. Option 2, one of the men asked aloud, "What do you think Nick would want us to do with her?" Now, I did have to look that up. Nick is in African. It means Uncle Nick, which is also, it means the devil. I've never heard that before. Basically, one of the men is asking, "What do you think the devil would want us to do?" And the other man replied, "I think he wants us to kill her." Frans instructed Alison to get naked again. She stripped off her clothes, leaving her sandals on because she assumed they were going with option 1, which meant she would need her shoes to walk through all this broken glass to make it to the road to get help. So she strips naked, and even though she didn't resist them raping her, unfortunately they decided Alison must die. As fast as it took Alison to blink, Frans was on top of her. His hands were squeezing her throat as she whispered, "Please don't kill me." Frans simply replied, "Sorry," as he continued to strangle Alison. They took turns strangling her in the passenger seat of her car. Her bowels evacuated as she fell unconscious, barely alive. It takes 33 pounds of pressure on your trachea to completely close it off. But they didn't just close off her airway, they crushed her airway. The buddy asked his partner in crime, who we now know his name is Frans, "Do you think she's dead?" as they dragged her body from the car. Frans replied, "Let's find out," as he stuck the knife he used to threaten and abduct Alison into her abdomen. He enjoyed the thrill of stabbing her so much that he withdrew his knife from her flesh and stabbed her again, and again, and again, and again. His buddy, not wanting to miss out on this activity, took his 8-inch knife out of his pocket and began stabbing Alison in her abdomen as well. Together, they stabbed Alison a minimum of 37 times in her stomach and abdominal region. Frans, the man who initially abducted Alison, specifically wanted to mutilate Alison's reproductive organs, like her uterus and stuff. Not sure why.
Probably thinking he'd get rid of evidence of her rape.
I don't make a baby that fast.
Well, hey, he's not the brightest crown, but I don't know what he's thinking.
By the time they were finished stabbing her abdomen, they had completely disemboweled her.
I'm glad if she wasn't dead, that she wasn't conscious for that.
While standing back to admire their handiwork, Alison's leg twitched. Together, the men decided not to risk her surviving being raped, suffocated, and stabbed, so this vicious duo slit Alison's throat. First the buddy Frans, but he didn't just slice. They used such force they nearly decapitated Alison as they dragged the blade 17 times across her neck from ear to ear. They stood back looking at the mess they made of this woman and discussed whether or not they had successfully murdered her now. Deciding that no one could survive that kind of attack, they used Alison's shirt to wipe themselves off before tossing the blood-soaked shirt onto the ground near Alison's body. They drove off in her car, leaving her bloodied, mutilated, raped, naked body in the filthy field. Now, who were these two vicious attackers?
I thought there were 3.
No, there were 2. Clinton and Frans are the same feller. He lied and said his name was Clinton. So Clinton, the original feller, his real name is Frans du Toit. He's 26 years old, and he was the son of a police officer. He was a troubled child. He set fires to school in 8th grade, claiming heavy metal music made him do it. His family moved to Port Elizabeth, same town as Alison, which was 93 miles away from where they had originally lived, to try to get a fresh start for Frans. but he ended up failing the 9th grade twice and began hanging out with a girl who he said was a witch. He claimed she summoned a demon and it possessed him. Eventually, his parents sent him to the army, where he spent a good chunk of his time in the detention barracks. After the army, he had a job briefly as a miner. He got married to a woman and they had a daughter together. He soon left his wife because she didn't satisfy his sexual appetite. He moved back in with his parents in 1993 when he married his second wife, and together they had a son. Now, since he had trouble holding down the job, he ran a sheben, which I had to look that up, and that is illegally selling alcohol. So I think it's safe to say that he's a troubled feller. However, that's not all. On February 25th, 1994, Frans abducted a 20-year-old woman outside of a pizza parlor. He shoved his way into her driver's seat, just like he would eventually do to Alison. So prior to doing this to Alison, he'd already abducted a 20-year-old woman, shoved his way into her driver's seat. However, this time with this young lady, he had a gun. He parked her car and raped the young woman before driving her to a cafe to buy her a sandwich and a rose.
What?
Yeah. He rapes her, buys her a snack, buys her a rose.
I wonder how he met his wife.
I don't know. And then he ordered this woman to tell him that she loved him.
Hmm.
He then drove her into the city before letting her go, and Frans told this woman, "You're an amazing person, and I hope I can make it up to you sometime."
Yeah.
A week later, after venting to a friend, that woman that he had abducted and assaulted, she told her friend about it, who on March 15th, Frans is arrested, and it had been nearly a month after the assault. He was released the same day on bail. Now on December 4th, 1994, Frans attacked another woman, this time bringing his buddy, the same buddy that helped him attack Alison. His name is Theuns, and he was only 19 years old. He came from a broken home. His mother had been married several times, and either man number 3 or 4, it said that he raped Theuns as a child.
Oh.
So this young man is not a happy feller either. And that information didn't come out, by the way, until he was on trial for the assault on Alison. So I don't know how much of that was just an excuse to try to justify his bad behavior. But this one made me kind of chuckle because the kids at school also made fun of Theuns, and they called him Theuns 3-tit because he had a third nipple.
It's wildly creative. 3-tit. Good one.
Theuns 3-tit. After 10th grade, he dropped out of school and joined the army. In 1994, he claims to have been seduced by a witch. And also in 1994, Frans and Theuns meet for the first time at the sheben that Frans was managing or running or whatever. Frans and Theuns abducted a 21-year-old woman together by shoving a gun against her stomach. She told them she was 3 months pregnant, but Frans told her just to shut the fuck up. They took her to an isolated area where Theuns proceeded to rape the 21-year-old woman. When he finished assaulting her, Frans ordered her to come give him a blowjob. When he forced her head down and she gagged on his penis, he then raped her. He was extremely forceful and hurting her, and she started pushing him away, pleading for Frans to stop. She feared for her unborn child. Instead, he told her to shut up and ordered Theuns to hold her down so he could finish. They discussed killing her, but decided to let her go. On her way home, she saw officers immediately stop to report the assault, and both Frans and Theuns were promptly arrested. Now, mind you, this is the second time that Frans is being arrested for assaulting a woman. We're talking back to back here. So they're both arrested, and then they're released on their own recognizance and instructed to return to court on January 5th, 1995. Less than 2 weeks later, after they were released, that evening, Saturday, December 17th, Frans was at Theuns' home for a barbecue. And at this barbecue, the two drank some beers. They had a 2.5-liter bottle of sherry, while Frans was griping about the tension between him and his wife because they were having some money troubles.
Quit spending it on booze.
And having court costs. Like, come on now.
Or quit raping everybody.
Keep your penis to yourself. With a sufficient amount of booze, the pair had decided they needed to go burn off some steam. And together,
they should have figured out like a game of ping pong, a quick run.
Right?
Anything.
Together, though, rather than play that game of ping pong, they decided to find another victim. More specifically, a beautiful girl to rape and kill who has a nice car. Their first attempt to abduct a woman, she saw them approaching and locked her doors. She managed to escape these two. Eventually, Theuns grew bored and decided to go his own way and went to a club. Tenants went to a club called Club Tonight. Frans, however, went out determined to find a victim for him and Tenants to rape and kill, and that's when he found Alison. After the assault and mutilation of Alison, Tennis and Frans walked off together, had a few more beers, and then went to bed. The following morning, Frans was so proud of what they had done, he used his still blood-covered knife to cut up his breakfast.
That's disgusting.
It's so gross. Little did Frans and Tennis know, Alison was still alive.
What the fuck?
Right? She was dying alone in that field, but she was alive. Apparently, if they had left her alone after they strangled her, she 100% would have died. Like I said before, they had crushed her windpipe. She would have suffocated to death.
Oh my god.
So, wait, listen.
When they chopped her neck, did they like basically open her trachea?
That is 100% what they did. Way to kill the lead here. But that leg twitch was a muscle spasm from her body being deprived of oxygen. She was literally dying. However, when they decided to slice her throat and they sliced below the crushed trachea, they allowed oxygen to fill her lungs.
Holy shit. Does she live through this?
I'm not telling. Alison slowly awoke, but laid still. Hearing the men discuss her being dead, she heard them use their real names, and as they walked away, leaving her, she had the reality of no one's going to find her for a while. She was afraid she wasn't going to survive, but wanting her attackers to be captured, she musters the strength to write their names into the dirt, and she also left a message to her mom, Claire, saying, "I love Mom." So sad. As she laid there alone in that field dying, she decided rather than wait for death, she was going to fight to live. She began to pay attention to her surroundings. She heard a car on a nearby road. Alison tries to get up, but her stomach felt weird, and she looked down and realized her intestines were all out of her body and on the ground.
Oh shit.
Alison tried to shove her intestines back into her body, but they were slimy, slippery, and she was bleeding profusely.
Yeah.
And for those who aren't aware, small intestines in an average adult are about 23 feet long, and that's a lot to try to figure out what to do with.
They also swell when they hit the air, so it's not like you can cram them back in.
Right. So Alison, she used her denim t-shirt that the men had thrown down next to her, and she collected her intestines into the shirt, like tucked them into the shirt to use as a pack, and then held the shirt with one arm up against her mutilated body, and she began to try to crawl through the dirt while holding her intestines in the shirt.
Oh my god.
She crawls through the dirt and the broken glass towards the road, one hand holding that shirt tight, containing her intestines, but with each pull, she's growing weaker.
Yeah.
Because she's still profusely bleeding.
Right.
Can you imagine?
Your head's nearly chopped off, your guts are falling out, and you're dragging yourself through broken glass. No, Andrea, I can't. I mean, the only thing I could say about the whole intestines thing is you don't feel those like you do your skin. Not to say that what happened to her skin and all the stabbings and her head being nearly chopped off won't be the owie, but like...
Do you really not feel your intestines? Because I feel like when you have gas pain, you feel that.
Yeah, but you don't have the same, like, you don't have the same feeling like you do on your skin with all your organs. The nerve endings.
Right, yeah.
So that's where, like, scooping them up and all that, where it's bloody, disgusting, and I don't know. Clearly she's going to live through this or we wouldn't know.
Unless you find her body with her shirt.
You're just going to be mad because I guessed it all already.
Yeah, you're an asshole.
I'm a good guesser.
You're an asshole.
A good guesser.
Anyway, can you imagine, though, being disemboweled and trying to crawl with one arm?
I done already said no and drag myself through broken glass. No.
So even without being disemboweled, I don't know how you crawl with one arm.
Slowly.
It seems like it's going to require a lot of core muscles. Like, you're going to need to use your abdominal muscles, which hers are all slashed up. She's not a big girl. So 37 stab wounds to your abdomen, that's a lot.
But I also factor in you got a lot of water and blood weight, and she's getting lighter.
Alison collapsed and passed out. While teetering on the brink of death, she has what some would describe as an out-of-body experience. She had a choice: continue to drift away or come back. Alison thought of her mother, Claire. She didn't want to die and leave her mom knowing how much she had suffered. She was going to fight. Somehow, with her determination and love for her mom, she decided she needed to stand up. She has to walk across this field to get the help that she knows she's desperate for. Alison stands up, but suddenly everything goes black. She can't see anything. She reached up to touch her eyes, to try like rub her eyes to regain her vision. But as she went to touch her face, there was nothing there.
Oh, her head fell backwards?
Her head was gone.
What?
From Frans tenants slicing her throat so much and so deep, they sliced through all the major muscles on the front and both sides of her neck. There was nothing to hold her head upright. Her head was dangling onto her back between her shoulder blades. Alison used her free hand to pull her head back upright. Astonishingly, her vision was restored.
What the fuck is going on? If I was just moseying along on my way to work, I'd be like, what the fuck is that?
Well, she's still too far.
I got it, but she's holding her guts up, and I wouldn't even say in, and her head on.
Yeah, so with one hand, she's holding her head upright, and with her other hand, she's gripping that shirt that's packed with her intestines, and she focused on her goal to make it to that road. After what felt like an eternity.
I'm sure. All of this feels like an eternity.
Oh, just hold on to your panties, because wait for this one. When she got to the road, she knew it wasn't going to be good enough to just be on the side of the road. She wanted to be...
If you tell me she gets hit by a car, Andrea, I'm going to be real upset.
She wanted to be sure that an oncoming vehicle would definitely see her. So she kept moving forward and then collapsed finally into the middle of the road. And the way she saw it was, what's the worst case scenario? She gets run over.
Right.
Eventually a vehicle approached and they stopped. Alison reached her hand up and waved so they would know she was alive.
That would scare the shit out of me to stumble across. I don't even know how you'd help that.
So you call 911.
Clearly, jackass, but you know how long that would feel like it would take for anybody to get there, and this poor lady.
So at first she panicked because the vehicle just sat there and she thought maybe that Frans and Tennis returned.
Oh, God.
But the vehicle moved around her and sped off. They just left her. At this point, it's 2:45 in the morning. Alison was beginning to lose hope and she started letting the sleepiness wash over her when she heard the screech of a woman screaming. And then suddenly a man was kneeling at her side. He took off his shirt and draped it over her bloodied, naked body. He very gently took Alison's hand in his own and told her to hold on. She tried to communicate, but with her neck sliced completely open, she had no voice. He calmly told her to relax. One of the people in the car that had stopped had new technology, a cell phone. They called for an ambulance and the operator said help was on the way. The man holding her hand was 20-year-old veterinarian student Tien Eldred. Tien was headed with his friends back to their campsite for the last night of their vacation. Tien saw Alison in a massive amount of blood and dirt, laying naked, struggling to fight to survive whatever had happened to her. He didn't know what happened to her, but he knew something bad happened. Her eyes were open and completely bloodshot. She was making eye contact and seemed to be aware of her surroundings. He could see everything inside her throat, all the muscles, the veins, her severed windpipe. Tien checked Alison's heart rate, which unsurprisingly was very weak. Her tongue was pale, and even though it was a warm summer night, her skin was cold to the touch. She was clammy, and she's losing all her blood. There was something protruding from the gash in her neck, so Tien shoved it back in and then applied pressure to that wound. Tien knew he needed to keep her awake, because if she drifted off to sleep, she might never wake up again. His calm presence helped Alison to stay calm. Alison gestured to Tien to look under the shirt, and he responded to her gesture and lifted the shirt that she had her intestines in, and he said he would never forget the horrific sight of her injuries, but he remained calm and did not show Alison his reaction. Another driver approached and stopped, and they thankfully had a blanket in their vehicle and provided that to cover Alison. Tien was concerned for her survival and also wondered why the ambulance was taking so goddamn long.
Because it always feels like that.
The hospital was only 15 minutes away, and she was suffering from so many injuries. He thought about trying to put her in his own vehicle, but there was no way to move her without a stretcher and
fucking her up more.
Right. And through it all, he continued to talk to Alison. He told her she was safe now, that she'd be okay. And he told Alison, don't worry, you will not die on this road. I will not allow it. Tiannan was able to get details on her attack by communicating with her through hand squeezes, once for yes, twice for no. At one point, Tiannan told Alison she had the most beautiful green eyes and she smiled weakly, but Tiannan described it as an amazing smile. Every time Tiannan would glance away from Alison, she would begin to drift off, but he would not let her go. After 4 phone calls for help, 4 times, and almost 2 hours later,
Oh
the
my
ambulance
God.
finally showed up. Yeah, right? When I read that it was nearly 2 hours after the first phone call that they finally showed up, I was like, what the hell? And then once the paramedics saw how bad off she was, they had no sense of urgency because they said she was as good as dead. I was like, what the hell? But Tiannan never released Alison's hand and he kept her awake. And she didn't release her grip on him either as they loaded her into the ambulance. It wasn't until they wheeled her into the casualty unit that he told her he expected her to wake up from that surgery and he would be there waiting for her when she did. I thought that was sweet.
It was.
The anesthesiologist, Dr. Coleman, said that he would need a specialist for Alison's injuries. The on-call doctor just happened to be a thoracic surgeon and would be able to perform Alison's surgeries to her neck. As horrific as this night is, she definitely has some guardian angels looking out for her.
Yeah.
Before they took her into surgery, by the way, they handed her a piece of paper to sign, authorizing them to treat her, which seems, I don't know, a little pointless. And while she's signing her name, she also jotted down her mom, Claire's name and phone number and asked that they call her. I was like,
Oh my God.
can I get like a bracelet or something that says if I've ever been disemboweled and decapitated,
Feel free to do the surgeries
just go for it. You've got my permission.
and drag myself through a field of broken glass.
So the anesthesiologist rested his hand on Alison's head and said, "Don't worry now. We're going to take care of your breathing. When you wake up, everything will be over. You can relax now." The thoracic surgeon, Dr. Angelo, said out of his 16 years as a surgeon, he had never seen injuries like Alison's. He described her physical being as she was filthy, black as a coal miner. Her entire body was in a fine layer of black sand. Her eyes had hemorrhaged and were blood red. Her hair was matted with sand, twigs, leaves, and dried blood. Her knees were cut and scraped. Her feet were lacerated. Her fingernails were black. The wound to Alison's neck went, like I said, ear to ear, and it measured 4 inches and so deep the doctors could see her spinal column.
Holy shit.
By the way, that protruding thing that Tiannan shoved back in on the road was Alison's thyroid. Her thyroid had been sliced in half, which that injury alone should have killed Alison. I found this interesting. If you nick your thyroid, that alone is a life-threatening injury. And if that didn't kill her, the doctors were like, she should have drowned in her own blood. But somehow she didn't.
Yeah, not only that, but like just her intestines falling out even the weeks later, that's just infection of all the things.
And since there were miracles surrounding Alison that night, miraculously, her carotid artery and jugular, they somehow managed to not cut those.
These two.
Right. So after several hours to repair the wounds to her neck, the doctor thought he was done, and the nurse shook her head at him. He looked at her confused as the nurse lifted the blanket and showed them her abdomen. They were horrified. Absolutely horrified. She was still in critical condition. They had to clean her insides out as well as remove every piece of debris from her intestines, every grain of sand, and not to make light of her injuries at all, or the task at hand for the doctors. But if you think of going to the beach,
getting all those crevices,
just getting sand on your legs and your feet, that's hard to get off.
And they're not sticky.
Right. I can hardly imagine the amount of time it would take. 23 feet of intestines plus the body cavity itself. And you have to get every grain of sand, every fleck of ash, everything had to be.
That was a whole lot of saline. And I'm sure they had to make sure that none of her intestines were nicked either. So just going through them.
They were, but her intestines were nicked. And they had to go through and not only remove all that sand, but also carefully repair her intestines. And once that was all done, they had to manage to pack her intestines back into her abdomen without twisting it or causing any more harm or damage. You want to talk about a daunting task? Ugh. They also had to repair her other damaged organs, like her uterus that they stabbed up. And even after it was all said and done, it was still a life or death situation because, like you just said, she was at risk of septicemia or having the injuries to her neck flare up and result in strangling her. After hours of surgeries, Alison woke up the next morning and her body screamed out in pain, but she welcomed the pain because that meant
She's
she was
alive.
alive. So now that she's alive, due to her injuries, the doctors informed Alison not only was her road to recovery going to be difficult, but they feared due to the severity of her injuries, she was most likely never going to be able to have children, which was devastating because she's young, and that just got taken away from her. Her mother was there, her father eventually arrived, and shortly after waking, she was reunited with the stranger that fought to keep her alive, Tianan. It was a very emotional reunion. And after seeing she was on the road to recovery, he had to leave Alison, but he gave her a cactus and a card. And inside the card, it said, "You are the bravest person I know." And then he headed back home to Johannesburg, which is roughly 10.5 hour drive from Port Elizabeth. As the detectives stood at Alison's bedside, they took notes of her ordeal. Mind you, she's intubated, so she can only do so much. Then they hand Alison a book of mugshots to flip through. Although it seemed like a daunting task, she looked at the images in front of her, and when she turned another page, she saw Fran's face. And almost as if the black and white photo was now in color, she pointed at his picture, and excitedly, the detective was like, "I knew it. I knew it." After she's identified her attackers, the police leave. They come back because the prosecution said they wanted to hear it from her mouth.
What?
It wasn't good enough she wrote their names. It wasn't good enough she pointed out their mugshots. They wanted to hear her say, "These are the men that attacked her." In less than a day, she just woke up. They came to her and her doctors, standing at her bedside, and said, they want to hear you say their names before they'll arrest them to make a solid case. The doctors were like, "No, you can't risk pulling that tube. The amount of injuries she sustained to her neck, that tube in her throat, not only do you risk tearing anything while pulling it out, but if her throat were to swell, that's the thing keeping her alive. And once they pull it out, they risk more damage if they want to put it back in." So it was a very big decision to try to remove that. And she just shook her head and was like, no, she's got to do it. She told the doctors, pull the intubation out, and she said their names. She said, "Frans and Theuns, and these are the men that assaulted me." Around 5 a.m. on December 19th, 1994, Frans and Theuns were both arrested. When they found out that Alison survived,
They've got to be horrified, and I hope they have a healthy fear of her because, whoa.
they both ended up confessing. They're like, "Yeah, I did it." Frans showed no remorse, though, and he seemed proud of what they had done. After a few setbacks, Alison was discharged from the hospital on New Year's Eve. However, she required daily trips back to the hospital to care for her wounds. She lived with her mom temporarily, and in February, Alison moved to a new apartment. By March 3rd, she was sitting at the police station waiting to positively ID her attackers along with several other women who had been assaulted by the pair. On March 23rd, both Frans and Theuns pled guilty to 8 charges, including kidnapping, rape, and attempted murder. During the sentencing on August 8th, 1995, the judge said he had strong reservations about the sincerity of the pair's remorse and that their crimes were both premeditated and planned.
And horrific?
Yeah. It was the court's responsibility to remove these two men from society forever. He sentenced Frans to 3 life terms.
How about to death?
He sentenced Theuns to 25 years for the rape of the pregnant woman and life for the attack on Alison. The judge wanted them to remain in prison for the rest of their natural lives. And after hearing their sentences, Theuns banged on the wall and yelled, "Here we go. Fuck y'all." That sounds really remorseful, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In court right before that, he's like, "I'm so sorry for what I did." And then when he hears his sentence, he's like, "Yeah, fuck y'all." A side note, Fran's father, like I told you in the beginning, I realize there's been a lot of details here, but his dad was a police officer. Fran's father was so ashamed of what his son had done. He couldn't cope with it, and I feel like the other police officers might have given him a hard time. He was so ashamed of his son. Sadly, he committed suicide a few years after his son's conviction. Side note, Tianan, Alison's knight in shining armor, he decided after helping Alison, he wanted to change his field of study from animals to people, and he became a doctor.
Very cool.
Another side note, Alison went on to marry a man named Tianen. I know I'm butchering these names, and I'm sorry, but it's not the same feller that saved her, okay? It's a different feller.
That's a bummer. Because that would have been.
And the pair married in 1998, so 4 years after her attack. And against all odds, the happy couple found out Alison was pregnant. In November of 2003, she gave birth to a son that they named Daniel. A few years later, in 2006, she went into labor with her second child. They ended up naming Matthew. You want to talk about a strange circle. When she went into labor with Matthew, one of the doctors on call was Dr. Ellard, who is the feller that saved her life in the road, who became a doctor.
Holy shit.
He helped deliver her second child.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Her married name is Alison Botha. She soon began traveling around the world, telling her story in 35 different countries. She was one of the first women from South Africa to speak publicly about rape in both her home country and abroad. She's written 2 books, and in 2016, her survival story was brought to life in the movie called Alison.
Never heard of it.
She narrates that. It's currently on Amazon Prime. I did watch it. Jason watched it with me. He was horrified because he didn't know the details of the case.
It's horrifying just hearing it.
So at the end of that movie, I was mortified when I saw that when they were making the film, Frans, who was in prison, reached out requesting to be a part of the movie.
Fuck you.
However, his demands, he had 3 demands. Demand number 1, he wanted a signed letter of apology from Alison to Frans because she intervened in a relationship that he had formed with a woman in the United States.
What?
Yeah. So apparently he got engaged to some crazy lady in the US.
But he's in prison for life.
Well, he got engaged to this lady, right? The lady's mom reached out to Alison and was like, can you please try to talk some sense into my daughter or help me in some way because this is horrifying. Alison wrote an email to the prison warden and was like, hey, can you do something about this? I'm sorry. They should not have internet access to just chat it up with people on Facebook, which is how he met this lady. And then she also asked, hey, please don't tell him I'm intervening. The warden printed the freaking email and gave it to Frans and said, here you go. So Frans was pissed. And then this woman, they got intervened. They ended up not having a relationship anymore. So he wanted a signed letter of apology from Alison.
Good luck with that, feller.
His number 2 demand. He wanted profit shares from Alison's book sales and her motivational speaking, and he wanted it backdated. And then number 3, he wanted it to be acknowledged that if it weren't for what he did to Alison, she would not be successful. This guy, obviously, his requests were denied. And as much as I'd like to say that's all I've got, unfortunately, it is not. After only serving 28 years in prison, in July of 2023, both tenants and Frans were released from prison on parole, despite the fact that neither one of the men were remorseful for what they had done to Alison. And now that is all I've got.
That was fucked up.
Dude, I know she doesn't die, so I'm sorry if this wasn't good enough for some of our fans, because they tend to like the cases where there's only murders. But dude, this is about as close as you get.
No, you got confused. They don't like when you do cases their penises are mutilated or falling off.
Right. I feel like this case, though, was...
Deserved a penis mutilation?
It sure did.
I can think of 2 that deserve to be chopped off.
I can't believe these 2 men are free. And Alison begged the parole board to not release them.
Yeah.
And not to be a piece of shit and go with the whole conspiracy thing, but I think they asked to have the tubes pulled from her throat in the hopes that she would die. Yeah. Because I think that because his dad was a police officer, that maybe somebody was trying to help the dad. Dude, he raped so many women and was just still walking the streets.
Yeah, but it's Africa.
Yeah.
Not the US. Things are way different. Rights are different. This was the 80s.
94.
90, yeah.
Well, it did raise an uproar once it hit the media that he was out. And he was literally on bond for raping one woman, got arrested for raping another woman, and then got released on his own recognizance to go assault Alison. All with these court dates pending and assaults.
I know you don't like when I ask statistical questions, but I feel like there's a lot of rapes and sexual assaults in Africa.
So I don't know the statistic, but I did read that you are more likely to be raped in South Africa than not raped.
What?
Yeah, I was like, that's horrifying.
What kind of statistic is that?
I don't know, but apparently rape is such a big thing in
Yeah,
Africa, and not to be awful, but it's kind of like with India. If you're a woman and you're caught by yourself, or even with a small group of women,
considered your fault.
yeah. And in Africa, it has nothing to do with the time of day. At least in India, they try to keep it to if you're out at night. In Africa, if you were a woman and you were out, you're lucky if you make it home that day without being assaulted.
You're a gazelle alone in the field.
And even if you're not alone, you're still vulnerable. I find it absolutely horrifying. But I do know that Alison and her family, unfortunately, her and her husband are divorced now, but she does have two healthy young boys. And I'll be curious to see what they grow up to do. Like one of them's going to cure cancer or something, because they were meant to be here and she was meant to be here, because there were so many things going against her and she survived. And then she wasn't meant to have kids, and she naturally conceived not one, but two.
It's also, it should go to people as a lesson in all of this, as one, to don't give up just because people say the odds are against you, because it's up to you. You're the only one who holds those cards, because people are wrong every day. Doctors are human, they get things wrong plenty of times, but they can only say the odds, which means there's odds.
Right.
So, but nobody can factor in your will to succeed in whatever you want to do.
I did laugh when I read that her mom's name was Claire.
I figured, because every time you said Claire, you said it in an extra weird way.
I know. I even added it in there a couple extra times just because.
And I rolled my eyes every time.
Her dad's name was Brian. Not that that matters. Then it made me look for a case where there was a Claire and a Dave, but that was a little bit harder. I find her story absolutely horrifying and amazing all at the same time.
You know what messes with me? The whole, like, you don't fight, you die. You fight, you die. It doesn't fucking matter. You're whatever that person's gonna do, whether they say they're not gonna hurt you or they're gonna hurt you, whether you fight or cooperate, it doesn't matter.
It did make me laugh, though, that because she cooperated with the rape, it made his little tiny penis die, and then he just had to give up. He couldn't finish, and then he went and sat pouty.
Yeah.
That did make me laugh.
I hope it never stood back up again.
Something horrifying needs to happen to them, because they don't deserve to walk free. And since neither one of them, even when they were being paroled, did not seem remorseful, talk about a try again.
That's because all they see, he made all these profits and they did all the work.
And the fact that he was willing to say he deserved some of her money, if I were her, I would be absolutely terrified. And I know she moved away from Africa, and I'm not going to say where she moved, because
yeah, fuck them.
She's got money now from doing all of her things. The internet was scrubbed of like her you can't find her maiden name.
Good.
Which blew my mind. I enlisted Jason to help me in trying to track down her maiden name. But I figure since it's so secretive at this point, I'm not going to try to uncover that one for her, because even when they reference the assault, they use her married name. And she didn't get married until 4 years after the assault. She used her money to scrub the internet of her married name, or her maiden name, which I thought was kind of interesting. Well, have you a good day, and let that be food for thought for you guys. I'm real curious, when her head fell between her shoulder blades and her vision went out, was it because her eyelids shut and she had no control? Or was it because something was severed? But when she was able to pull her head upright...
I pictured it like a short-circuited thing, like the wires exposed, and then when she popped her head back up, it connected a little bit.
Yeah, that's what I assume too, but it's just horrifying to think about, because I would like to know the medical reasoning behind it. I know that that's not the point of the story, and I did try to look it up.
I think it's amazing that these morons saved her life.
They did. They saved her life by trying to kill her more. And it was because her leg twitched. You know how, like, if you kill a snake, it continues to twitch? Same idea.
Don't kill snakes.
Well, we've seen our mother kill snakes before.
Yes,
so
the nerves from after twitching.
For you, it'd be a tree frog.
I did not kill a tree frog.
You sure did.
Are you talking childhood?
No. No, I'm not talking about the one you squeezed when you kissed it. That was a bullfrog.
Whatever. I don't even have a memory of that. so I wouldn't remember the twitching.
That's because you were like 3. It was horrifying.
But what tree frog did I kill? Actually, don't remind me, because I believe I killed a frog.
You did it last year. Yeah. And then Dave ran one
It
over.
wasn't a tree frog. Were you talking about when it got hit with the lawnmower?
That one was Dave's fault. You did it with a weed eater, remember?
That wasn't a tree frog either. It was just one of those regular ones. I don't know how to mow or weed eat without having them jump in the way. I think they're just suicidal, but it's real awful.
Mm-hmm. We need to put a sign out.
That's why I made frog houses with my gourds. That way they have somewhere to go. I don't know why they hop towards the weed eater. It doesn't make any sense. But the one that got hit with the riding lawnmower, that was horrifying. Poor little thing.
Anyway.
Thanks for that. I blocked it out, asshole.
You're welcome. What are big sisters for? To remind you?
Apparently, to cause scarring memories.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Claire.
I'm Andy.
Follow us each week to get your fix of the atrocities that occur in true crime. And don't forget to tell people about us and rate us if you like us. But don't rate us if you didn't. Just change the channel.